Hello students, welcome to Distinction Learning Platform, and on this platform you'll find revisions, explanation to difficult topics, a lot of stuff. So before we begin our lessons, make sure that to subscribe so that you can be updated with our upcoming videos, and don't forget to like the video. Okay, so to make the story short, let us begin. In this video, we're talking about what? Digestion, which is under biology. This is a very important topic to understand, okay, because it usually comes during an exam. So now, what is this digestion that we're talking about? So what is digestion? Basically, if we talk about digestion, we're talking about the breaking down of what? Large food molecules into smaller ones, but either using physical means or maybe chemical means. So let us write something about that. So what are we saying? We're saying digestion basically is the breaking down of what? Food molecules. Let's just say large food molecules. Food molecules into smaller ones. By either using what? Chemical means or physical means. So by either, so we say by either chemical means or physical. So now let us understand what I mean if I say chemical means and what I say if I say physical means. Because there is a very important thing that you need to understand about. There is what we call types of what? Digestion. Okay, types of digestion, on how you can break down what? These food molecules that we are talking about. Remember that food can be what? Carbohydrates, can be what? Proteins, can be lipids. So for you to break down all those food molecules, they have to pass through the process called what? Digestion. Now I introduce something which is very important. Chemical means and what? Physical means, because we break down those large droplets of food molecules into smaller ones either by using what? Chemical means or physical means. So let us understand about that. So if I say chemical, it means that I'm using what? Enzymes. Okay? If someone says chemical means under biology, it means that now they are using enzymes to break down what? Those large droplets of what? Food molecules into smaller ones. That's what we mean. Then what about physical means? Physical means, it means that you are not using what? Enzymes. Basically, you are using what? The teeth. Okay, you are using the teeth in order to break down the food molecules into smaller ones. And that's why if we talk about the types of digestion, there is what we call chemical digestion and physical digestion. Okay, so if they ask you to say how many types of digestion do we have how many types? Two types. The first one is what? Chemical digestion, and the second one is what? Physical digestion. If you talk about the chemical digestion, we are saying it's a type of digestion where we break down large droplets of food into smaller ones by using what? Enzymes. That's chemical. Chemical means enzymes. Physical, now we're saying you are breaking down the large droplets of what? Food molecules by using what? Teeth. Okay, if you are using teeth to break down those food molecules, then that is what we call physical digestion, and that's what we call physical means, because you are using what? Teeth in order to break down food molecules. Okay, so on that part, make sure that you understand. Okay, so apart these types, there are other terms that they use under digestion. Okay, the other terms that they use. So these are the two types of digestion. We have chemical digestion and physical digestion. Chemical digestion uses what? Enzymes. Physical digestion uses what? Teeth. Okay, now apart from that, what else are you supposed to understand? So there are also some terms that they use under what? Digestion. You need to be familiar with them. So what are those terms? There's what we call ingestion. Okay, ingestion. So what is ingestion? Basically from the word ingestion, which is inside. So ingestion basically is a term that we use under digestion, where if the moment you put the food molecules, let's say carbohydrates, into your mouth, then that's what we call ingestion. So ingestion, basically you are putting the food molecules into what? Your mouth. That is what we call ingestion. So in simpler terms, you are just saying putting food into the what? Into the mouth. So that is the first term that they use, ingestion. Okay, what is the other term? They also use another term which we call egestion. Okay, egestion, that's from the word e. E means what? Exit. Okay, E stands for what? Exit. Basically, you are removing the food molecules from the body. Okay, you are removing the food molecules from the what? From the body. So egestion, basically remove. So let's just put remove here. So you are removing the food molecules from the what? From the body. That's what we call egestion. And sometimes this egestion, with the one which is starting with E, they can use with the word which we call what? Defecation. Okay, defecation and egestion, these are the what? They mean the same. Okay, so these are the important terms that you need to understand if you are talking about what? Digestion. Okay, quite alright. In summary, what we've talked about is what? The definition of digestion and also the types of what? Digestion. Okay, so now let us proceed to another important thing. Now, this digestion that we're talking about, okay? So this digestion that we're talking about, this one, where does it take place in our body? So you need to ask yourself, this digestion that we're talking about, where you're getting maybe starch, maybe anything, you are putting it into your body. Now, where does it take place? Does it take place in the liver? Does it take place in the heart? Okay, why is that place? So we call that place called what? The alimentary canal. So this tube. So the tube that is coming from the what? Mouth up to the what? Anus. So this is the mouth as usual. Although it is looking funny. So that is the mouth. Then this is what we call the anus. Okay. So this tube starting from the mouth coming like that up to the anus is what we call what? Alimentary canal. Okay. It is what we call what? Alimentary canal. So if someone asks you to say what is an alimentary canal, you say it is a tube that comes from the what? Mouth up to the anus. Okay, and what is the use of alimentary canal? That's where digestion takes place. Okay, now this same digestion, how many digestion do we have? Okay, the digestion of food molecules, how many do we have? So we have about what? 3 types of digestion of what? Food molecules. We've got the digestion of starch, we've got also the digestion of proteins that we'll talk about in other video, and also have the digestion of what? Lipids. You need to be aware of. But in this video, we'll talk about what? The digestion of starch. Okay, so that we fully understand everything that we'll be talking about. So now we'll start with what? Digestion of starch. Since we've talked about the types of digestion, we've talked about the terms that they use, the ingestion and the egestion. Okay, now let's talk about the food molecules and how they can be digested. Okay, how many types of those digestion? We've got what? Digestion of starch, we've got digestion of what? Proteins, and digestion of lipids. Okay, so now let us start with digestion of starch. So before we go into any details, we need to understand what starch is. Okay, we need to understand what starch is. So let us understand starch here. So we might be just talking about starch, then you don't know what starch is. So we need to understand starch so that we understand how starch is going to be broken down into smaller molecules. So what is starch? So let us put here starch. So what is starch? So starch, basically, they use a term called polysaccharide. So starch is a polysaccharide, or it is a carbohydrate, okay, that is mostly used in what? The energy production in our body. Okay, we use starch so that we can get energy from it. Okay, so we say starch is a what? We use this term called polysaccharide. So we use this term polysaccharide. So starch is a polysaccharide that is what? That is used mostly as a source of energy. Okay, basically if you say polysaccharide, we just simply means what? It's a carbohydrate. So starch is a what? Carbohydrate that is mostly used for what? energy production. We'll talk about that, okay? So that is all about starch. And remember that if you talk about the classification of carbohydrates, do you know that? Classification of carbohydrates. How can you classify carbohydrates? So carbohydrates are further classified into what? Or these starch are further classified into what? They are further classified into what? Polysaccharides. Okay, we know that. They are further classified into what? Polysaccharides. What is the second one? The second one is what? A disaccharide. And the third one is what? Monosaccharide. So this is how everything moves under starch or carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are these, they've got what? These classes. There's this polysaccharide class, disaccharide class, and what? Monosaccharide class. Okay? Now, if you talk about the polysaccharide, you say this is what? Starch. So a good example of a polysaccharide, we can put what? Starch here. Okay? What is a good example of a disaccharide? A good example of a disaccharide is what we call maltose. Okay, so you need to be aware of these terms because we'll be using them. So a good example of what a disaccharide is what we call maltose. Okay, what is the other good example now for the mono? So this is a monosaccharide. This is a monosaccharide. So what is a good example of a monosaccharide is what we call glucose. Glucose. Okay. So now, why am I troubling you with all that information? Because it is very, very important to understand them. Reason being, because if you start talking about the breaking down of starch, it will follow these same steps. Okay? If you have starch, if you start breaking down starch, it will be converted into what? Maltose, and it will be converted into what? Glucose. Or if you want to be using other terms, you can say this starch that we're talking about, it will come from what? A polysaccharide, it will go to a disaccharide, it will go to the monosaccharide. Very, very important steps that you need to understand. Okay? Now, since we are clear about that, now we can proceed to what? Other information that you need to be aware of. Okay? So now, what are we saying? So start digestion now. So since we've understood what starch is, now we can ask ourselves, what does this digestion of starch begins from? Okay, it starts from the what? From the mouth. So we'll be using this diagram in order to what? Explain the full concept. Okay, so the digestion of starch begins in the what? In the mouth. So let us understand something. Let's say this is what? This is the food that you are eating, like that. Okay, this is the food that you are eating. You eat food, but this food is rich in what? It's rich in what? Starch. It contains what? Starch. You eat in shima. Okay, so that food that you eat, then that is starch. Then the moment you put this food into the what? Into the mouth, like that, what we call this process, if you can remember, if you get this starch and put it into the mouth, what did we say? The term that we use was what? Ingestion, if you remember. So this one is what we call ingestion. Okay, so sometimes I can use that English to say, if you ingest starch into the mouth, because ingestion, I said, is just putting the food molecules into the mouth, then we call it what? Ingestion. So now you put this starch into the what? The mouth. What do you think these are smaller substances in red there? What we call that gland? We call it what? This one, salivary what? Gland. So salivary gland is a very, very important gland in what? Starch digestion, because it produces some certain important what? Substances. What does it produce? Okay, what does it produce? So this saliva, the moment you put food into the mouth like that, this one salivary gland is going to produce a certain important what? Enzyme. A certain important what? Enzyme. What do we call this enzyme that is produced by the what? This gland. What do we call that? We call it what? Salivary amylase. So this one, the moment this food bolus is here, then it's going to the salivary gland, they are going to produce what? Salivary amylase. So we'll write that one. So the moment you put this bolus of food here, okay, then salivary amylase will come and start doing something to that what? Food molecules. Okay, you need to understand about that. So let us write this one. So what do we call this? So this enzyme is called what? Salivary what? Amylase. Salivary amylase is produced by the what? It is produced by the salivary gland. Okay. The moment you put food into the mouth, the salivary gland will produce what? Salivary amylase, and this salivary amylase, what is it going to start doing? It will start breaking down what? Starch. It will start breaking down this starch. So let us write it here. Okay. So if this is the food molecule, which is what? It contains what? Starch. Okay. And this is what? This is salivary amylase. Okay. This is salivary amylase. So what it does is this. Okay. It will come here and start breaking down what? These food molecules into what? Something very important. It will start breaking down that into smaller food molecule, which we call what? Maltose. Okay. So we are saying to say this salivary amylase will convert this starch into what? Maltose in the mouth. So we can now conclude to say, starch digestion begins where? In the mouth. In the mouth, where salivary amylase produced by the salivary gland, so that it can start what? Converting that starch into maltose. You need to understand that what? Conversion. Okay. So now, before we go any further, we can write something here from what I've explained there. Okay. So what are we saying about that? We are saying to say starch digestion. Okay. What do we say? Begins in the what? Begins in the mouth. Where? So starch digestion begins where? In the mouth. In the mouth. Where now? Where what? This salivary what? Gland. So let us use right here. So where what? Salivary. We said salivary what? Glands. Produces what? What type of enzyme does it produce? Produces what? Let us use blue. Produces what? Salivary amylase. And what's the function of salivary amylase? So this salivary amylase is going to convert what? It converts starch into what? Maltose. Okay. So those are the first important thing that's going to happen in the mouth. Okay. Now, if you try to think about this, is that this process is not going to finish all the starch in the mouth. Why? Because food in the mouth doesn't do what? Stay long. So it will now continue with what? Other starch molecules that are not digested by what? Salivary amylase. So it's going to continue its journey. So we are saying this digestion is not going to finish in the mouth. Why? Because in the mouth the food molecules doesn't do what? Stay long. So this food molecule is going to continue here, okay, here on the what? Esophagus. What we call this structure here on the neck? We call it what? Esophagus. Okay, we call it what? Esophagus. So let's just put E here. So this is the esophagus where what? The food molecule is going to pass from. Okay, and the food molecule, for it to pass from the mouth up to the stomach, then it has to pass through the what? Esophagus. By which process? So the food molecule passes through the what? The esophagus by the process called what? Peristalsis. So let us show something here. So we are saying if this is the esophagus, for the food molecule to move from what? From the mouth up to the what? This stage is it will follow which type of process? We are saying peristalsis. Peristalsis. Okay, it will follow this process called what? Peristalsis. So peristalsis is the process in which muscles on the what? On the neck, they are going to relax and what? Contract in order to move the food molecules from the mouth into the what? Into the stomach. You need to understand about that. So, by the way, what we're talking about is that for the food molecule to move from the mouth up to the stomach, it has to pass through the esophagus by which process? Peristalsis. You need to understand on that. Okay. So now this is our food, which is in the stomach now. Finally, as you can see, this gland, this organ, what we call that? We call it what? The stomach. The stomach. This one. This is what? The stomach now. Okay. Now, who can answer this question? Okay, who can answer this question? What's going to happen to that what? To that food molecule that has now reached the stomach? Is the starch digestion going to continue in the stomach? The answer to that question is what? No. Starch digestion doesn't happen in the what? In the stomach. So you don't need to what? Say anything there, okay? So now, what are we going to say now here up to the stage? So here we've just talked about what happens in the mouth. Then we can continue to say, okay, this food molecule. So we said from there, this food molecule will move to the stomach, to the what? Stomach. By what? By through the esophagus. By what process? So we said by peristalsis. Okay, so this is the point that we're talking about. So this food molecule, because it contains starch that is not finished to be digested into what? Maltose. Now it will continue its journey from this mouth up to the what? Stomach by the process called what? Peristalsis. This is the point that I'm talking about. This food molecule will move to the what? Stomach through the esophagus by peristalsis. So those are the things that you need to what? Tell them. Okay. Now we move to this one. So, and I said that in the stomach there is no what? Digestion. There is no digestion for what? For starch. Digestion of proteins, that's why it will begin now. So starch digestion doesn't happen in the what? In the stomach. But if you look at the other types of digestion, like protein digestion, that's why it will start. So it will give more time for protein digestion in the stomach. But here, since we are talking about starch digestion, we are going to say starch digestion is not going to happen in the stomach. Okay, then what's going to happen now? What's going to happen? This food molecule will continue its what? Journey. Okay, it will continue its journey. So this food molecule, it will continue its journey here, like there. Now it will reach this what we call this plateau. This is the small intestine, the one in blue. This is what? Small intestine. So before I talk about anything, let us understand about the small intestine. Okay. So small intestine are very, very important structures in the alimentary canal because they do something in the digestion. So let's talk about the small intestine here. Okay. Small intestine. So let's talk about them. So we need to be, if we start talking about something, we need to understand them so that we don't forget, okay? Because there are important terms that we are going to talk about. So if you talk about the small intestine, this is the one in blue. As you can see, starting from where the stomach ends, then up to where the large intestine begins. Those are what we call the small intestine. These. Now, these small intestine are categorized into what? Three important parts, okay? There's the first part, okay? There's the first part, which we call what? What is the first part of the small intestine? So this first part, what do we call it? We call it what? Duodenum. So what do we call this one? Duodenum. So you need to know the three important parts of the small intestine because digestion of starch also happens in very important parts of those what is small intestine. Okay. So the first part is what we call duodenum. Okay. What is the second part now? The second part, what do we call it? We call it what? We call it jejunum. Okay, and the fourth part is what we call what? Ileum. Okay, so you need to know about what? Those terms. Very, very important. So the small intestine you further categorize into what? Duodenum, jejunum, and what? Ileum. Okay, now you can ask yourself to say, what happens in the duodenum? Because this food molecule is coming from the stomach and it will go into the what? The first part of the small intestine called what? The duodenum. Now, what's going to happen to that what? To that food molecule that is going to the what? The small intestine. Okay, what's going to happen? This one is going to happen. So this is the major thing that's going to happen here. So I'll be writing the major thing that will happen in the what? These three parts of the what? Small intestine. Here we're going to say again, starch will be converted into what? Maltose. So in the duodenum, the major thing that's going to happen is what? Starch again will be converted into what? Maltose. But to take you back, you can get confused. You remember that in the mouth, what was happening in the mouth? What was happening in the mouth? We said again, starch was converted into what? Maltose as well. Okay. So in the mouth, starch was converted into maltose. Again, in the duodenum, starch is converted into what? Maltose. What could be the reason why? Because remember that in the mouth, food doesn't stay long. So because food doesn't stay long, the undigested starch molecules will be digested in the what? Duodenum. Okay, so those leftovers that were left in the mouth by saliva and amylase, now they will be fully digested in the what? Duodenum. Now remember here, what was the enzyme that was digesting the starch into maltose in the mouth? We said that was what is salivary amylase. Okay, we said that was salivary amylase. Also here, but there will be something here. So here it is what? In the duodenum, what is the enzyme that's going to convert starch into what? Maltose. It is what? Pancreatic amylase. So we say P amylase. Okay, we'll write that. So in the duodenum, pancreatic amylase is the one that's going to convert starch into maltose. In the mouth, it is what? Salivary amylase that's going to convert starch into what? Maltose. Okay. Now we go to the jejunum. Jejunum, what's going to happen? Now in the jejunum, this second part. So after this part, okay, we'll talk about it. Now in the jejunum, somewhere here, okay, in the jejunum, what's going to happen to that? Now here it is what? It is now maltose. You just get maltose. It's the one that's going to be converted into what? Glucose. So if someone asks you to say, understand digestion, then in the jejunum, what really happens there? You say it is maltose being converted into what? Glucose. But also this one has to what? Undergo a certain conversion by what type of enzyme? Okay, everything that we've been talking about, they are catalyzed by what? A certain enzyme. Okay, now what is the enzyme that's going to catalyze this process where maltose is going to be converted into glucose? What we call that enzyme? We call it what? Maltase. Okay, so maltase. So just from the word maltose, you say maltase. Maltase is the one that converts maltose into glucose. Okay, then what about the last part? So the last part, which is somewhere here. So the last part of the small intestine, what happens in the last part? What happens there is what? Absorption. So, but this one is going to have its own video. Okay, so what happens in the last part there is what? Absorption. So absorption of what? Absorption of what? The end product of starch digestion, like what? Glucose. So here, glucose is going to be what? Absorbed where? In the ileum. So you need to take note of that. Now, let's finish up because we've talked about the parts of the small intestine. Now, let us visualize what we're talking about. Okay, so let's come here. So initially we were in the stomach. So in the stomach, we said there is no digestion of starch in the stomach. Now, if there's no digestion of the starch in the stomach, then what's going to happen? The food molecule continue its journey to this what? To the first part. What do we call this first part of the what? Small intestine? We call it what? Duodenum. Now here we're going to just use what? A letter here. That is what? Duodenum. Now in the duodenum, make sure that you need to understand something. There is a gland. Remember, if you go back to the mouth, there was what? A gland here, which we call what? Salivary gland. Also here, there is a gland that's going to produce an important enzyme that we're talking about there. So what do we call this? This all red part here. So we call it what? Saliva, pancreatic what? Pancreas, I mean. So what do we call this? We call it what? Pancreas. So let us write this one. So what do we call this gland? We call it pancreas. Okay? So this pancreas is the one that's going to start producing something. Okay? So this pancreas, it will start producing these. What we call this? So this is what we call a certain enzyme for what? This starch that is coming. Okay? What we call this enzyme? We call it what? Pancreatic what? We call it pancreatic amylase. Okay? So what are we saying? We are saying that this pancreas is going to produce what? Pancreatic, let's just say P amylase. It's going to produce what? P amylase. Okay? So this pancreatic amylase that is produced by the pancreas, it will go in the duodenum and it will find what? It will find this food molecule, okay? This starch. If it finds this starch, what do you think is going to happen? The starch now will be converted into maltose, okay? Okay, so we are saying this is starch. So let's just say S for starch, S for starch. Now the moment pancreatic amylase comes here, then this starch will be converted into what? It will be converted into what? It will be converted into what? Let's just say M, which is maltose. So there will be this conversion because of what? Pancreatic amylase. Okay. Now this maltose will continue its journey like that. So this is maltose. Okay. This is maltose that is coming like that. Okay. Now the moment now, since the work in the duodenum is done, because now pancreatic amylase is the one that is converting what? It is converting starch into maltose. Now the journey will continue like that. Okay. The moment now it reaches what? A certain part of the small intestine, which you call jejunum. So now this is the jejunum part. So remember that the first part was what? The duodenum part. Then this is the jejunum part. Then in the jejunum produces something. So these walls, the walls of the jejunum here, they are going to start producing something. Okay, we'll write everything here, don't worry. So it's going to produce what? A certain enzyme. What did we call this enzyme? We called it what? Maltase. So this is maltase. Okay, which is here. Okay, that is maltase. Maltase is the one that's going to be what? Produced by the what? The walls of the jejunum. So you need to state that the maltase, what does it come from? It comes from the walls of the what? Jejunum. If this maltase is produced by the walls of the jejunum, what do you think is going to happen? Now, this maltose that was initially the food molecule, it will be converted into what? Glucose. So let's say G for glucose. So maltase will start converting what? Maltose into glucose. Okay, that's the work of what? The maltase. Where is that happening? It is happening in the what? Jejunum. Now let's continue. Now also this glucose now will continue its journey up until it reaches what? The last part. Okay, what is the last part now of the small intestine? Now we say that is what? Ileum. So now this is what? Ileum. Okay, the last part is ileum. Now, that's where what? Absorption will happen. So we'll look at what it means when you say absorption of what? Glucose, or end product of digestion. We'll look at in other videos. Okay, so make sure that you understand about that. Now there is a question that you can encounter to say, what if they ask you to say, where is digestion of all nutrients or of all food molecules? What does it end from? We say it's end from what? The jejunum. So the digestion of any food molecule, whether starch digestion, protein digestion, lipid digestion, they will all end in the what? Jejunum. That's what digestion ends from. It's where? In the jejunum. Okay. So now let us write something here. So let us write here. So we said now the food molecule now is in the what? In the stomach. Now what did you say in the stomach? We said so that digestion doesn't happen in the what? Stomach. So you say in the stomach, digestion of what? Starch stops temporarily. Okay, so this is what we said. So it will stop temporarily in the what? In the stomach. Why? Because there is no enzymes for starch digestion in the stomach. Starch digestion doesn't happen in the what? In the stomach. Then what is the next thing that we talked about? We said now, since in the stomach doesn't happen, it will continue its journey in the what? In the duodenum. Then you say, in the duodenum, what's going to happen? Duodenum, what's going to happen? Okay, so let us use something else. So in the duodenum, we said now, pancreas produces what? Produces pancreatic. So we know that pancreatic juice. Okay, so other thing that they use pancreatic juice that contains what? Pancreatic amylase. So they can use pancreatic juice because pancreas produces something like a juice. In the juice, that's why you can find an enzyme called what? Pancreatic amylase. So now let's just summarize that one. We are going to say pancreas produces what? Pancreatic amylase. Then that will convert So what does it convert? So convert what? We know that pancreatic amylase convert what? Starch into maltose. So that will convert what? Starch into maltose. Okay? So that's what will happen in the what? In the duodenum. Okay? Now let us proceed in the last part, which is in the ileum, in the jejunum. Okay, so here that's what will happen in the what? Duodenum. Then let us write the last thing. In the jejunum, what do you think is going to happen? In the jejunum, we know now this is the jejunum. Here you come here. In the jejunum, what's going to happen? Maltose will be converted into a glucose by maltase. But the maltase now, what does it come from? It comes from the walls of the what? Jejunum. So you say, so in the jejunum, maltase is produced. Okay, we say maltase is what? Produced and converts what? Converts, what does it convert? It converts now maltose into glucose. So that's what happens in the what? In the jejunum. Okay. Now, what is the last part that we talked about? The last part which we talked about now, this is where in the jejunum, this is where what? Starch digestion ends from. Okay. So that's where it will end from. Now you can just say, now this food molecule continues its journey in the what? Last part of the what? Small intestine, which we call ileum, where absorption will what? Take place. Absorption of what? Glucose, because the end product that we are having here is what? Glucose. Okay, so now to summarize everything that we've talked about, we've talked about to say, okay, starch digestion begins in the what? Mouth. Where what? This starch will be converted where? Will be converted into what? So let's just say it will be converted into what? Maltose. Okay. What is the last thing now that we talked about? This maltose now will be converted into what? We know now that is what? It will be converted into glucose. Okay. Now let us summarize the enzymes. Here, the first enzyme that's going to convert starch into maltose, we know that basically we know that is what? Amylase. Okay. We know that is what? Amylase. Now there are two types of amylase. Is the one that can be found in the mouth, we call it what? Salivary amylase. And the one that can be found in the what? Duodenum, produced by the pancreas, what do we call that? We call it pancreatic amylase. Okay, so basically let's just call it what? Either what? S amylase or what? P amylase. S amylase means what? Salivary amylase or P amylase. They all have the same function, converting starch into maltose, but it will depend where they are. Salivary amylase, where can you find it? You can find it in the mouth. Pancreatic amylase, where can you find it? You can find it basically in the duodenum, but it is initially produced by the what? Pancreas. Okay. Then if you go to maltose, so what converts maltose into glucose? We all know now that is what? Maltase. Okay. You all know that now that is maltase. Remember, maltase, why is it produced? It is produced in the what? The walls of the jejunum, where digestion now ends from. So maltase will convert maltose into what? Glucose. Okay. So that's all about what? The digestion of starch. Okay. So make sure that you understand something. Reason being, because this can come under what? Essay question. They ask you to say, describe the digestion of starch. So this is how you can what? Explain everything. You need to tell them everything like that. Okay. So this is where we end from. Make sure that you subscribe and what? Like the video. All the best. Start well.